Welcome back. Episode 117 of the Grouch and the Brainstorm. This is Mike, and today we have a very special episode. On today's episode, my friend Randy T is going to tell his story, and I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance. The audio on this thing is going to be a little weak. It was recorded on a less than professional device, and we normally use, professional equipment. But this story was actually recorded on the fly, and Randy called me, and he gave me permission to use his story on our podcast. So there's not enough good stuff I could say about Randy, but if there was one important thing I could say is if you are new in recovery and you're scared and you're not even sure if you want to stay, it's always best to sit down next to someone in a meeting that's just like Randy. He has been the single biggest inspiration to me, largely in part due to the fact that he lets you make your own mistakes in due time. And by allowing us to do that, we learn and we grow, and he encourages recovery and he encourages sobriety, but he also understands the disease of alcoholism. So with further ado, take it away, Randy.
Thank you, Jane. I was going to make an announcement. I want to thank the committee for inviting me, but the committee is Jane. I still appreciate it. And, this is always, for me anyway, it's always a daunting task to tell my story, but I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to try to give back at least a little bit of what was given to me. Share my experience, strength, and hope. It's good to see my friends again and my new friends. It's also a privilege to give back. And I hope somebody here gets something out of my story and that we all stay sober. I wouldn't want to get my pay cut. And that's a joke that I like to tell in AA. New people come into AA and they think, man, I kind of want to get involved, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how it's going to look. And I tell them, hey, if you mess it up, we'll cut your pay. And your pay is zero, so it's okay. One of the things that I like to talk about things that I learned in AA, but one of the things I learned in AA that I needed to learn in AA was you can't save face and save your behind at the same time. We're just that kind of people, or I'm that kind of people that, hey, if I don't think I'm gonna look good, I'll just act like I'm not interested in that when I may need it to save my life. And that's how crazy I am. And I got into that treatment center and I said, Randy, you got a choice here. You can either tell these people what they want to hear and shine them on and go on back to what you were doing, or you can ask for help and maybe save your life. And thank God that time I did exactly that. I'm going to tell you what it was like, kind of little of my growing up period, and my drinking. Try not to stay drunk too long. Then I'm going to talk about what happened, which is my train wreck, how I got to AA, and kind of what it's like now, how it is in AA, how my life is today, and hopefully you'll relate a little bit and maybe get something out of it that'll help you. I grew up in a typical family, two-parent family. Welcome, Tommy. Glad you're here. Met Tommy along the way too. I met Tommy doing service work. Actually, we try to do taking meetings to juvenile detention center over here. That didn't turn out too well, but we all stayed sober, So it was good. Anyway, I did grow up in a two-parent family. My father was military. He was kind of a mechanic, pilot in the Air Force, and he did 21 years, and we retired to Bossier City at that time. I was 5 years old. That was 1963, so that kind of, for you Louisiana math people, that's how old I am. And I love my father. I love my mother. My mother was, as far as I'm concerned, my mother was the epitome of unconditional love. I mean, it didn't matter what you did or what somebody did, which was kind of bad for me, but she loved you anyway, and she would do anything to help you. Just a real giving person. And Jane remembers her too, I'm sure, because she remembers her. My father was a little different. He was sergeant in the Air Force, so he kind of told you what to do and how to do it. And I'm not going to say my father was an alcoholic, but I will say that he did drink, and he, when I was younger than 5, I remember he was my hero. He was the guy. He's in the Air Force. He's TDY, so I'm waiting for him to come home. My mom's telling me all these good things about him. When he retired, I don't think he knew exactly what to do with himself. And so one of my earlier memories is him sitting on that porch in Central Park where we lived in Bossier, drinking beer. He was drinking beers. And I don't really remember him getting drunk then. And I don't really remember him drinking beer after that. Because after that, he started drinking whiskey. And he had a big jug under the kitchen sink. And he didn't drink every day. But when he drank, every time I saw him drink, he got drunk. I mean, commode hugging drunk. He was not playing around. And at that time, we had one phone in the house, and it was in the hall. And he would get drunk, and he would call people up. And he was funny as shit. He was funny. He would call up, the bank or the credit union or whoever, maybe somebody down at City Hall. I remember one time somebody called us, and he was drunk, and he answered the phone, and they were asking for Susie or something. He said, "You stuck your finger in the wrong damn hole." We had rotary phones back then. Later on, he was military, so we did our banking business at the credit union. And later on, when I was a teenager, I started hanging out over in Patricia Park. I met this guy and his mother, and she had worked her way up through that credit union. And she knew my father. And I thought, oh shit, She was the one, when you were drunk and you called the credit union asking about your money, they would put her on the phone with you. So that's how she knew my father. So, as much as I loved him, I think I started to judge him after that because of his alcoholism. And I probably said I was never going to be like that. And in my opinion, I turned out worse than him, because I had him to look at, and I could have gone a totally different direction. And we go the direction that we're going to go. My father, I think he died sober. He had DUI later on. I know, and I think when I got to AA, I had a little resentments against my parents. Hell, I had a resentment against a lot of people. I didn't realize it. Didn't know what a resentment was when I got here. But I understand today that my drinking had nothing to do with him. That was my choice. And when I started having a problem, it was my choice to continue on drinking. So they were doing the best they could. He was doing what he could with his life. My mother, my father, all those people. And I just did what I did, and it's okay. I was glad to have them. I knew those people loved me. I knew they loved me. My first drink that I recall as my first drink, I was about a sophomore in high school. I was about 16. And we went to, it was like a class, not a class, but some people in my class, a Christmas party. So we went to this Christmas party, and they had some old rock gut whiskey, Old Crow or something like that. Hell, might as well have been champagne for me, I was okay with it. And I'm drinking, and then in those days, there was a lot of change going on. So they had difficulties with how you dressed and how short the girls' dresses were and how your hair was and all that. So I had a classmate and she was slick. She would wear the short dress to school, but she had a different dress in the locker room, in her locker. So if they'd catch her with a short dress on and tell her, you got to go home and change, she'd just go to her locker and get another dress. So she was one of those kind of girls, which I liked her, you know. And so she was at this party. And she starts talking to me, you know, and we're talking, and I'm drinking and this, that, and the other, and she's telling me about traveling and all this, and it was several days later when I realized she was like a traveling prostitute, you know. What I did know was that I was drunk, and that they had to carry me, 4 of my friends had to carry me out to my buddy's 57 Chevy so I could heave over the side of it and go on from there. And that was my introduction to drinking. Now, a normal person, that would have been their introduction and probably the end of their drinking, or maybe the end of their drinking to get drunk. I never stopped drinking ever after that. If I was to stop drinking, it was with a lot of restraint. You know, I knew. You know, if you asked me, hey, Randy, would you like a drink, but you could only have 2 or 3, my correct answer would have been no. But I probably would have told you yes, and then try to figure out how I'm going to get some more later. So that was kind of what I did. I always drank alcoholically. I always drank to get drunk. I never stopped until I was drunk. You know, I never did. I never could. I never even saw the point of it. You know, I'd see people drink 1 or 2, and they would say, oh, I'm going to stop now. I'm starting to feel this. And I think, what? You know? To me, that was alcohol abuse. I mean, you know, you got a perfectly good drink or drug right in front of you. What are you doing? So that was what I did. And in those days, we did about every other kind of chemical that came along under the sun, too. I mean, you know, my friend had black light posters in his living room, and his parents stayed back in the bedroom, and it was just, you know, it was just that kind of time. But I always remember just drinking to get drunk. I was so bad, or I felt like I was so bad, that back then Budweiser was not the big beer. You know, Schlitz was the big beer. This was in like mid-70s. So we're drinking Schlitz. We thought that tasted good. You know, hey, we're drinking this. But I had a friend named Ringo, and Ringo, swear to God, he had a Gran Torino, just like Clint Eastwood. He had one. And Ringo drank Budweiser. So, you know, Ringo would always ride around. He'd have like a case of beer, and I didn't have any money, so I became a Budweiser drinker. Me and Ringo, you know, we'd run around and drink like that. I started having difficulties with alcohol. I started getting in trouble, you know, DUIs, got drunk, got into a knife fight one time, almost died. You know, I got a second DUI. I'd had a daughter by then and gotten married, but that didn't slow down my drinking. In fact, we kind of drank together, except when she was pregnant. This is my first wife. When she was pregnant, she didn't drink or smoke, and it was not good, you know. I mean, she was a never mind. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. Okay, it wasn't good. And you know, and I had resentments about that too. I didn't get it. I didn't realize that the problem wasn't these people. The problem wasn't these situations. The problem was me. The problem was me. I was an alcoholic. So I finally got sentenced for substance abuse. I don't know if y'all been sentenced for substance abuse before. It's kind of interesting. Back then they would send you once a week. You'd have to go to this class in the evening and pay money for them to abuse you, really, basically. And they would ask you about your drinking and things like that. And they would make you take an abuse in front of them. And And I was so sharp that at times I would drink on top of interviews. Don't ever do that. It's really ugly. And I can remember going to that substance abuse, and they would give you drug tests and this and that, and I would fail their drug tests. On top of I'm still drinking, I would fail their drug tests. And they told me, Randy, if you fail another drug test, we want you to bring a pillow, and you're going to do 60 days in Pine Sanitarium, which was the sanitarium, that you went to. That's what they said. Do you think I failed another drug test after that? Absolutely I did. Luckily, they were bluffing. They were bluffing. I can remember there was a counselor, and I think she had either counseled heroin addicts or been a heroin addict or something. But I had these run-ins with the police. I'd been to jail a few times, DUI, public drunk, this and that. And I told her, I said, we talked kind of hip back then in the 70s. And I said, these police are on a power trip. That's what I told her. And she said, just like that, she said, aren't you? And I had no idea what she was talking about, But I think looking back on it, I probably was. I was trying to be okay with my life and who I was through alcohol and drugs. That's what I was doing. So I just later on, I just kept continuing on. I would go from job to job, do this and that. I was always working, but I wasn't having a good life. I don't think I wasn't happy with me, so it was real hard to be happy with other people. Then in the mid-90s, came home one day from work. I came on break from work is what I did. And my ex-wife, she said she was pregnant again. And I had a 13-year-old daughter at that time. And she said, hey, it wasn't planned, She said, I'll do whatever you want. Get an abortion, I'll have the baby, whatever you want to do. I said, there's only one thing to do, have the baby. Who is now 32 years old. But I was still, I was spiraling down. I did talk one of my friends into selling me his house, so I got into a bigger house because of that. And so did he. He got another one. And things started, we started having big problems between me and her, and just, I just wasn't doing too well. And I'm drinking and drunk, and I'm wanting to stop. I'm wanting to stop. And I had some mental issues too. Nothing major. I had been to Brentwood once before, and the guy I think he thought maybe I was an alcoholic. He asked me if I was having a problem with alcohol and drugs. I said, yeah, I can't afford them. I need some more money. He didn't think that was as funny as y'all did. But it was just difficult. Alcohol and drugs wasn't just my problem. Alcohol and drugs was my solution. That was my answer. And it was a terrible, terrible answer. But it was the only one I had at that time. It was the best one I had at that time. And so I would just continue to do the best I could with life, which entailed, using those chemicals to try to get through and to try to function and to try to move on to the next thing. So I did get to the point where I wanted to quit. And I did quit. And at that time, my wife at the time and I had separated. So I quit, and I was cold turkey in it. And y'all know how much fun that is. And I got some really bad news, and I thought, I'm not going to deal with this. Everything's over. My marriage is over. Hated my job. Here I am, not drinking and drug. I'm miserable. And I thought, I'm not going to deal with this, and tried to kill myself. try to kill myself. I'd never done that before. I'd had a lot of depression and things like that, and I, kind of not real happy, but I've never done that before. Luckily, I screwed that up too. So, that's the good thing. And I learned something later, and I've met a lot of alcoholics and addicts that have attempted suicide. I remember I went to treatment after that, and this guy talked about depression, and he talked about suicide. And it was like he was talking to me. And he said, depression is anger turned inwards. He said, you take that anger and you stuff it down, and you stuff it down, and you stuff it down. And he said, if you don't get some kind of relief valve, he said, suicide is that, spraying that anger and fear and depression all over everybody that cares about you. And I thought, man, that's what I did. That's what I did. And I can remember even after I attempted suicide and ended up in the hospital, and then I ended up back in Brentwood, they kept asking me, or of course they're asking me in the hospital, why did you do that? 500 times. Because at first, I was so miserable that I didn't want to live after that. When they brought me back, I was so lost and confused. I didn't want to live after that. And finally the only answer I had was that seemed like the thing to do at the time. And that was my own solution. That was my only solution. If you're like me, if you're an alcoholic addict and you drink and drug to be okay, and life sucks, and you decide you're going to cold turkey drinking and drugging, and then it gets worse, it got worse, then that might look like a way out. That might look like a way out. And then after I got into Brentwood, and those people started helping me, and then I eventually got into AA and got a lot more help. I thought, wow, you could have asked for help before you did that stupid shit, don't you think? But I didn't think like that. I'm real good at making wrong decisions, especially, I don't know about y'all, but when I get emotional, I get emotional and I think I got an IQ up here. When I get emotional, my IQ goes down to about there, and I do stupid shit, and I say stupid shit. So today I try to avoid getting overly emotional and avoid making decisions in that frame of mind. I have a personal rule that if I'm emotional about something in my life, I'm not going more than 24 hours without calling my sponsor about it, to talk about it. Hey, this is what's going on. What do you think? Because that's what this is all about for me. If I could figure it all out, I never would have been an alcoholic. I never would have got here. I never would have stayed here. So that was my the first part. When I got to Brentwood, and they're asking me all these questions. They're trying to diagnose me, and they finally and I thought, hey, I'm a psych patient. I wasn't drinking, but they wanted to make me into an alcoholic. And I thought, well, I don't want to be an alcoholic. That's not interesting. Alcoholic, we are the most predictable people in the whole world. We do the same stupid shit over and over. And I do. And I've seen a lot of people do that. I'm in Brentwood, and the people I'm talking to out on the porch, they're alcoholics, and they are doing what I was thinking about doing, which is telling the counselors what they want to hear so they can get their ticket punched and go back out there and drink again. And that's what a lot of them did. So they're trying to make me into an alcoholic, and even though I knew I was an alcoholic, I thought I was more of a psych patient. I'm more uptown than just a drunk. And so I fought it. I wouldn't go to meetings or things like that. I wouldn't go in what Trish calls a druggy buggy, go to meetings. But I wasn't getting any better. They were trying to medicate me, but I wouldn't really let them do it. They give me knockout pills, and I'd wake up the next morning and I couldn't function. So I said, I don't want to take that. And they're thinking, okay, buddy. And so then I was just raw emotion all the time. Finally, I went to a Sunday morning Brentwood AA meeting with that couple that used to run the meeting. I don't remember their names now. Elizabeth and her husband. And I don't remember anything they said. The only thing I remember is that they were real nice. They were very nice people. I also remember in treatment, they had this counselor, like a drill sergeant counselor named Millicent. Millicent was tough. Millicent, because I was inpatient, but a lot of people were outpatient, and they might come in and they drank a beer or something like that. She could smell it at 100 yards. She knew if you had been drinking. And she would start to talk about alcoholism. And she told us one day that, if you're an alcoholic, when your drinking started, your emotional growth stopped. And I thought, that's not good. I don't want to be 16 again. I'm 36, 37 years old. They taught me a few things in treatment that I was able to use a little bit. But it really wasn't until I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous where I really got my education in, what this is and recovery. I did finally start going to meetings. I started going to meetings here. I was going in that room there. It was smoking back then, and I smoked, and it was still ungodly. I mean, that's a small room if you're all smoking in there. I can remember sitting in there one day, and I sit in the corner wherever I'm at, or I end up in the corner, and I'm telling this other guy, man, that's a lot of smoke in here. He said, remember what you're here for. That shut me up. I said, yeah, I'm here for this. I'm here to save my life. Something that was really, I look at it as neat now that happened to me was the people that sponsored me when I first got into AA, and the people that I wanted what they had when I got into AA, they were doing service work. They were doing a lot of service work. So I ended up trying to do that myself. I was so miserable, I would do anything to get out of that frame of mind. So some of y'all might remember where the old Bossier jail was in Bossier. And I remembered it well because I'd been incarcerated there a few times. So that was Steps Detox Center at that time. And that was pretty raw too, man. Those people got honey and orange juice and that's it. And yeah. So we're sitting and what I was doing there, of course I wasn't detoxing. I was doing intakes and answering the phone and things like that, and they would have little in-house meetings, and we try to facilitate them. So this guy calls in, and he is suicidal, so he's getting my attention, and he's an alcoholic, and he can't go to treatment because he'll lose his job and his apartment, and so. I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm on the phone with him, talking to him, and they tell me about this 12-step call list. Come to find out they have a list of people that live in different areas of town that are willing to go do a 12-step call. And so, we talked to this guy and got him on the phone, and I call these other people, 12-step call list, and they're supposed to go over to his apartment. And so that was the end of the call. Well, the next day I was back doing intakes, even though you weren't supposed to do it every day. And he called back and he said, he was real grateful, that we had talked to him. And I was glad to try to help somebody. And then I can remember, this was about a month later, I'm in a meeting at St. Mary of the Pines, I think. I used to go to meetings out there. When I first got into AA, I went to meetings all over the place. I'm sitting in St. Mary of the Pines and I'm listening, and this guy starts talking. I said, son of a gun, it's him. I know that voice, it's him. And he's got one AA member on one side and one AA member on the other. And I thought, I don't know if he's still sober today, but that made me feel good. And that, getting back to what I was talking about, if you want to feel good, do some service work. Do some service work. My sponsor told me, he said, if you want to feel good, you got to do good. Alcohol never told me that. Alcohol said, you can do whatever the hell you want. I'll make you feel good. But sobriety, if I want to feel good, I got to do good. So that's, I learned from people like Jerry there, people like Herb, Tommy. I learned from those people because they seem pretty happy with sobriety. And if you don't get involved in recovery, I don't know that you can be happy in sobriety. It's very difficult, for me anyway, because I get very introspective. I'll figure out why it's wrong. I'll figure out why I'm not having fun. I'll figure out why I need to escape from here and do something else. Because that's what I do. That's what I do. I quit. Anything I don't want, I quit. I can remember when I first got sober, because of my attempted suicide, I had a lot of guilt, shame, and remorse naturally. And I'll tell you another story. It was I had an initial sponsor that was given to me, and I was telling him about my story, and he told me about his suicide story, and he asked me not to tell anybody that story or who it was, and I never have. And I remember that. I thought he cared enough about me that he didn't want to tell me his personal story, but he did because he wanted to help me. I never forget that. And then I ended up with another sponsor, and I was kind of in the same frame of mind, and telling him all my woes, and he said, "Well, I think you need to make a gratitude list," And I made the mistake of telling him, "Well, that'll be pretty short. That'll be a short list. Don't ever tell your sponsor that. Trust me." And he started telling me, what was he? He was telling me a story about his mother had emphysema and she couldn't get a full breath, and how grateful she would have been just to get a breath of fresh air, and made me feel about that tall. And but he wasn't trying to make me feel small. He was trying to help me. And he did help me. I learned to have gratitude after that. I learned the things to be grateful for, no matter what's going on in my life. We have a saying around here that if everybody took their own problems and put them into the middle of the room, at the end of the day, you would probably take your own problems back. Well, think about that. Everybody's got problems, but you want your own problems back, so your life must be pretty good the way it is. And if it's not, I know there's things that I can do to make it better. So I learned to have gratitude, and I learned to take that depressed, suicidal, negative mindset person, and so far to this day, gratefully, that guy has never come back. He has never come back. And I've had problems, issues, all kind of malfunctions all the way. But I learned that, and I only learned that in AA. Another guy, or another thing this sponsor was talking about was, he was talking about God. And I believed in God. I was a good little Baptist, good little Baptist kid. I was saved at 11, and by 12 I was backsliding. I don't know about y'all. Probably looking for a drink, I just didn't find it for a while. But he was talking a different way. He didn't, and my relationship with God at that time went kind of like this. I ignored God. When I got in trouble, I would make a foxhole prayer, please get me out of this, and I won't do it again, knowing I was lying, not expecting him to fulfill my prayer, and that was my relationship with God. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And this guy was telling me about his relationship with God, God of his understanding, and he said, when nobody's around, I'm not alone. And I thought, he's schizophrenic, you know, and hearing voices. But then I thought, wow, you know, when nobody's around, I'm alone. You know, 2 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and you think about what you should have said when that asshole said something to you, and you know what I'm going to say next time I see it, and all that kind of thing. That was me. You know, I didn't have that, and you know, it's a process. It definitely is a process. But today I have that. You know, I have God of my understanding. Even if nobody's around, I'm not alone. I'm never alone, and I don't usually pray for myself very much at all. I have a lot more faith than I used to that things are going to work out, so I don't have to. And I pray for other people. And when I do pray for myself, it's usually that I won't be the asshole. You know, that I'll be a better person. That's the kind of things I pray for. It's not material things or that kind of thing. And I'm so grateful for that. You know, to have that, and that's kind of where that came from, was him, and of course he learned it from AA, because I asked him, I said, you know, what are you getting out of this? Because we went to a meeting earlier, and somebody was talking about calling their sponsor once a day. Shit, I was calling them 3 or 4 times. I mean, I was a mess. And I'm asking them, because I'm just that kind of, I'm a straightforward person. What are you getting out of this relationship with me, sponsoring me? He said, I'm just hoping you'll get this, and if you do, that you'll pass it on to somebody else. But the main reason I'm helping you is because somebody helped me. That's why I'm doing this. I thought, awesome. You know, we'll get along great, and maybe in a few years I can help somebody else. Another thing was, and if you're new here, you might still be having this. They talk about losing the obsession to drink, thinking about drinking all the time. And whenever I was not drinking, I was always thinking about it. And they told me to pray for sobriety, and pray for the obsession to drink to be taken away. And I thought, I know that is not going to work. You know, I've been sober before, and it doesn't work. And then I started doing it anyway. And one day I woke up and my life was still really a shambles, other than AA. I was still had a lot of mixed emotions, but I didn't have a desire to drink and drive. I didn't have that, and I thought, wow, there is something going on here, more than what I can see, more than what I can figure out. And these people have told me the truth again. That guy never lied to me. And the people in AA never lied to me. I couldn't understand it. You know, when I first got here and they start passing the basket around like we were doing, I thought, you need an usher for that. You know, that's a lot of dollar bills. It's kind of tempting for me. And I've heard his story. I know it's tempting for him. You know? So that's what I'm thinking. And it's like a whole different world. It's like a whole different language. And Bill Wilson called it the language of the heart. I didn't get it. It didn't make sense to me. It's Shangri-La. I'm like, they never talk like this in the bar. You know, what is going on? You know, working the steps was it was a real good defense against what was going on inside of me. You know, and working the 4th and 5th step, as much as I hated to do that, was afraid to do that. You know, what they'd think, what they'd say. And Father Tom I did my first 5th step with Father Tom Vestal, rest his soul. And we got finished with that 5th step, and he was really good with the 5th step. I mean, he took me back to my earliest memories, and he was telling me stories of his own. He was making me feel real good about the whole thing. And when we got done, he said, "How do you feel?" And I thought, that's a trick question. I don't, you know. I said, I don't know. And he said, well, and he had his workplace was in his garage, and he had a restroom in there. He said, go in that restroom and look in the mirror. And I went in that restroom and looked in the mirror, and I was just grinning from ear to ear. And I didn't know that. I couldn't feel that. I couldn't tell it. So, you know, it was like a spiritual experience for me to do that and get that stuff out. You know, we were talking about it earlier. They said, you're only as sick as the secret you keep. And when I got here, I was all secrets, you know. I was a Baptist. We don't confess. You know? I don't know about y'all. You know, I hear about these Catholic people. They confess. All the Baptists do not do that. You know, we don't do that. We hide Bibles and stuff. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying anything against any religion because, you know, today it's totally different. But at that time, that's, you know, that's what I was going by. Even in the house, they didn't encourage us to tell people what was going on. We didn't talk about our business. You know, we kept it close to the vest. And you know, I'm running out of time. I've just learned so much. Joe here is my sponsor now. One of the things that he's taught me is, hey, you know, mind your own business and keep your expectations low. And so that's, you know, that's what I need to do a lot of times. I learned about fear and anger. You know, I'm talking to this guy about something I'm upset about. It was a girl, you know, and it's like she woke up in a different world every day or something like that. And I'm trying to scheme this stuff. And he said, sounds to me like you're powerless over this situation, and the only illusion of power you can manifest is to get angry. So that pissed me off. And he was right. So today, if I'm feeling angry, you know, wherever it's at, on the road or wherever, I try to look for the fear that underlies that. You know, today I work with my sponsor regularly, talk to my sponsor. I do sponsor people, they sponsor people. You know, working these steps, it's everything. You know, without it, I know nothing. You know, without it, I can't do those amends that I don't want to do, but I have to do them. Yeah, I mean, I talked about you're only as good as the secrets you keep. You're only as sick as the secrets you keep. You know, I didn't understand resentments, but I came to understand resentments. And they talked about resentments like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. Well, I don't need to be drinking poison. Hell, I can't afford that. I can't afford that. So I have to come to grips with that. I have to forgive other people what they did to me. It doesn't mean I accept it. It doesn't matter what they did. You know, we've all been victimized in some form or another. But as long as I'm not forgiving that person, I'm letting them have that control or power over me. You know, why am I doing that? I'm not hurting them. They don't even know. They could be dead. You know, so I have to get rid of that. I was going to tell the Herb Wilson story. A lot of y'all maybe been in the club. I don't know. They might say it elsewhere, but we make an announcement: don't drink and you won't get drunk. Right? Yeah. Well, there was a Herb, you know, and I got there in '95. Herb got sober in '90. Jerry got sober in '90 also, and Herb, he's rocking along, and then he started to get sick. And every day, you know, they would anybody have any AA related announcement? And Herb said, "Don't drink and you won't get drunk." And he said what happened was Herb had tried to get sober many times, and one time he got sober, but he was in the wrong place. He was in the bar, little bar or restaurant. And he's sitting at the bar, and they're asking him, "Herb, you want to drink?" Herb said, "No, I don't want to drink. I don't drink anymore." And the other guy said, "You never could drink anyway." So that pissed him off. He had a drink. He had a few drinks. And on the way out of this place, he walks by and he sees this guy he knows, and this guy, he knows he's a serious alcoholic, but he's been sober for a long time. And he asked him, you know, "How do you do it?" And that's what he told him. He said, "If you don't drink, you won't get drunk." You know? I mean, only in AA is that some kind of spiritual solution. You go out in the world and tell somebody that, they will try to lock you up. You know? Don't drink anymore. Really? You know, we had another guy, Dick Haddon. He told us that, he said, it's not the caboose that gets you, it's the engine that gets you. You know, it's the first drink that gets you. And we listened to him because he was a railroad guy. You know, we figured, hell, he probably knows. You know, this is what that is. And Jerry used to talk about AA taught him Life 101. You know, when life was going on, when it was time to make a decision or do something, I was out there taking that drink. You know, so that was where I learned about doing the right thing afraid. You know, when I was afraid, that's when I'd take a drink so I could get away from it. You know, a lie seems easier than the truth. It's really not, but it seems easier. Because if I tell a lie, I probably don't have to take responsibility for my actions now. And I may never get caught in my lie, you know. So telling the truth, I have to take responsibility right now. But AA teaches me that that's the way to do it. You know, that's the way to do it. I ended up getting married again, and that was a whole other story that I don't have time for. But when I married her, she had 3 children of her own. One of them was a daughter the same age as my son, who I told you is 32 now, so she's 32 also. They were 12 at the time and had a couple of older children. And I thought, you know, how am I gonna deal with these 3 children? You know, they're not my children, but I'm marrying into this family. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna use the principles, you know. I'm just gonna treat them like they're my own. That's the only way I know how to do this. Because if I don't do it that way, I'm going to screw them up and me up. Because what I didn't tell you was another thing this guy told me early on. He said, look, he said, when you get sober, your conscience is going to change. He said, your conscience is going to get bigger. So what you used to be able to lie about and cheat about and steal about, it's not going to feed it. Joe says, you'll still be able to do it, but you ain't going to feel good about it anymore. So if you're planning on staying sober, my advice is, you know, start telling the truth. Start being honest. You know, be true to yourself. My wife doesn't realize that one of the reasons that I'm honest with her and she can look at my phone or anywhere else is because I don't want guilt over anything. I'm not doing anything to jeopardize that. But it's as much to do with my own recovery, my own life, as it is doing the right thing by her. So, you know, life in AA has been good. If you're in a negative situation, God can turn that into a positive. I came in here wishing that somehow they could turn my life into some shiny apple. And they said, no, they said, what we're hoping is we can turn your lemons into lemonade. You know, and that's what I've seen happen. Man, I didn't even get to my relapse, did I? I had a relapse. It's okay. Just come back. Carl Haddon was my hero. And the reason Carl Haddon was my hero was because it took Carl Haddon 20 years to get 1 year of sobriety. But then he stayed sober for the rest of his life. And I thought, man, he kept coming back. I still make mistakes. I still have character defects, still work my program, you know, daily. But compared to how my thinking was, it's just a whole different and a better life. Had I not quit drinking and worked the steps, I would probably not be alive today. I love my wife and my children. I have a different relationship. I have a good relationship with my children, my wife, even my ex-wife. Although my present wife is not real happy about that. Sobriety is doable. I didn't know if this was doable. Even though all of you could do it, I didn't know if it was doable for me. I found out it is. It is. You know, we're all different people, but we have the same recovery program offered to us, and it works. You know, you can do this long term. I hope what I've shared has helped somebody. I know it's helped me to be able to do this. I could never give back anything close to what AA has given me, and I mean that sincerely. It's it's just life changing. But I am happy to try, and I thank you for your time. That's all.
Thank you, Randy, for a wonderful story, a great sense of humor, and for being an inspiration to many, many people. I'd like to remind everyone that this is episode 117, and that's just the way we release it now. We don't do bonus episodes, but we will be doing an audio video of 118 later in the week with back to our high quality equipment. And I hope it's not necessarily the equipment or the quality that we're listening to, but the message. And you can't get a better message than that. So Randy, thank you again. And I am Mike. I am actually in Burleson, Texas. I am not at Rule 62 Studio, and I am a member and always will be part of the Grouch and the Brainstorm.